Coming to you from the beautiful metaverse, and more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition, and welcome to Midday with Reverend Don. And as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can communicate with me directly by typing your question or comment into whatever platform you happen to be watching on, and we can talk with one another. And we've been doing that quite a bit this week, which is very good, I think. I like to have it back and forth. This week has been our Defense Against the Dark Arts week. Today we're going to talk about the famous freezer spell and what to do if you feel that you are in somebody's freezer. Um, and tomorrow we'll be talking about protective amulets and talismans and things of that nature. So I hope that you have found it an interesting subject as we've been dealing with it this week. Um, it's not one that I talk about a great deal because I don't really like to encourage the paranoia that sometimes results from considering these things, but um, it is something that does sometimes need to be considered, and it is something that you should have an idea of what to do if there is a problem. But never make it your first assumption that problems in your life are the result of baneful magic, because kind of like Mercury retrograde, more often the problems are just going to be ordinary problems. That don't need an extraordinary explanation, but there are exceptions. And as we have been talking about, it's not only the possibility of baneful magic, but also simply negative energetic charge um, that can have negative effects on you. And so these different ways of dealing with that are, I think, very important. So the freezer spell comes out of the practice of hoodoo, and it's the idea that you take the name of a certain person, you put it in a bottle with water, you put it in the freezer so the water freezes, and the situation involving the person also freezes. Um, and it can be used in a number of ways, some of which are not what I would consider baneful magic. It's often used simply to cool down a situation that is too hot, for want of a better way to put it. But it can also be used to freeze people in ways that would come under the heading of baneful magic. And it's a very popular spell far beyond its origin. It's popular, for example, in modern Wicca. Hello to Rajput in the chat room. It's good to see you, Rajput. And throughout, I think, the metaphysical community, because it's very simple and fairly effective. So, what do you do if you think you might be sitting in someone's freezer, and how would you know? Um, I would say that the way that you would know is if you find yourself incapable of taking any action, or otherwise suffering from um, results that might be attributable to freezing. And if that's the case, you want to break that binding that has been put on you. And the way that you would do it is not really dissimilar to what you would do for any binding. We talked yesterday about cutting cords. That's one thing that you can do. I have something more specific today that we'll talk about as we go forward. Um, but everywhere you look, you see people talk about how to do the freezer spell. You rarely see anyone talk about the antidotes to it. What you want to do, obviously, is to unfreeze it. And you cannot, obviously, affect the physical components of the spell. But if you've gathered nothing from the things we're saying, that's not the point. The point is the energetic attachment. Sympathetic magic, which is what this is, the idea that like affects like, that if you want to cause an effect, you create something similar. Um, it creates an energetic effect on the person who is targeted by the spell. If you want to eliminate that, it's the energetic effect that you have to deal with. You can see this in many different ways. If you're not a person who um, understands things, particularly in terms of energy. You might want to look at it in other ways, but I'm going to talk about addressing it in terms of the energetic effect. Um, Again, you want to be careful about making assumptions, particularly on things like this, because it may be that your problem is a perfectly ordinary problem. And all too often, people want to blame their problems on extraordinary circumstances when it's really their own behaviors. And the blockages that are holding them back are internal, not external. Um, and so I would say always start with that assumption that you're dealing with internal blockages. But sometimes you may be dealing with an external blockage that has been the result of, oh, hello to Lori in the chat room. It's good to see you, Lori. Um, may be the result of baneful magic and so forth. And when you find that is the case, then you want to break them. We talked about cutting cords yesterday. Um, there are a couple of other ways that you can approach this before we get to our specific subject today. Energy work in general. Um, you can look for blockages in your energetic system and physically pull them out. That's one way to approach a situation like this. You look for the part of your energy that is blocked and you break up that blockage. Um, you could address it through something like a burning, um, which is a simple spell where you write your intention on paper and burn it to bring it into manifestation. What I'm going to say that you should do also involves burning, and you can see I have a candle here ready for use. And I have written on this piece of paper the name of someone who theoretically might be in someone's jar. Um, let's say it's my name. Now, what if you're wrong? What if you're not in someone's jar? Well, then nothing's going to happen. If you're trying to break a baneful magic that does not actually exist, well, it's not going to harm anyone because there's nothing there other than trying to break it. If it does exist, hopefully you will break it. Oh, and hello to Jason in the chat room. Uh, Numerous of my nieces and nephews are here today. The whole High Corel family mob, as we've been called. Um, and it probably does say something about us that we mostly like that name. Um, but what I'm going to do with this, so I'm going to focus on breaking the ice that may or may not hold the subject, and use the heat of the candle flame to do this. And I'm going to hold my paper above the candle flame. I'm holding it significantly above the candle flame. There we have a better view. And Lori says we're getting T-shirts made. Yeah, that had been mentioned to me. Um, you know what they say: the best revenge is living well. If someone has something unkind to say about you, reclaim it. Um, you want to be careful not to hold it too close because it doesn't actually have to touch the flame necessarily to catch fire. So you also want to make sure you have a burning dish nearby. If it does catch fire, that is not necessarily a bad thing. It shows that you're breaking it faster than anticipated. But what you want to do, I'm just going to lower these so I can do them a little more easily because you don't actually have to see it. You've seen what I'm doing. And I'm going to imagine the ice that may be surrounding this person and holding them back. I imagine the bottle in its freezer. I imagine the heat, well, I physically feel the heat of the flame, and I imagine the heat of that flame heating up that bottle, breaking that ice. I see the energy of the flame rising up and encircling that bottle. I see the ice cracking and falling away like shards of glass. I break the energetic blockage. I burn it. I melt the ice. And though I know this will not affect the physical bottle, that is not the point. I break the energetic limitation. I see the ice falling away. I see it turning to water and flowing off in every direction. I see the water within the jar becoming liquid. And I see the name, as originally written, dissolving and going away, together with the power of the spell. And I bring my burning dish nearby. And I'm also going to burn my paper. And even as this paper burns, so too may what I have done take full effect. And may any baneful magic currently in play be destroyed. May it be counteracted. May it go away. And that is what I recommend to do if you think you've been frozen. You may want to do it more than once if you find it not immediately effective, but you also want to remember maybe you're not frozen, maybe it's other things. Um, but this is a particular aspect of baneful magic I was specifically asked to address. And so I am doing so. And what you want to do again is to disrupt the energetic issue, to break the ice, and to break the blockage. You may wish to include an incantation with this. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we ask you to help me in this breaking of baneful magic, to lend your power to mine and make it stronger. And just feel all of that energy going out in other more positive directions. Now, anytime you feel that someone has bound you in some way, you can do something very similar to this. You can actually use the same technique. You can use similar techniques. You can cut cords. But what you need to do is to break the energetic blockage. There are people out there who will try to tell you that there's nothing you can do in such a situation. That's nonsense. We wouldn't be practicing magic if there was nothing we could do. Sometimes it's just a matter of realizing that something got through your shield. Now, as I say, I was using my own name because, it's been pointed out to me that part of what happened to me this year is I've been running on about a third of my heart's capacity, with two-thirds being effectively frozen. Now, I am not going to assume that that's the actual cause, but as I say, if it's not, breaking an energetic blockage that is not there is not going to hurt anything. But if it is there, better to break it. Um, Again, I'm a great believer in the idea that you look for the ordinary explanations first. I've known a lot of people who are very quick to jump to the idea that, oh, somebody did something. Um, and, I come from the school of thought you should not be using baneful magic. Um, it is not what this is for. It's not what it's about. You should be using magic to make things better. Um, and that is really why we have this. But there are people who do use it in negative ways. And there are places, I will have to admit, where it's debatable what's negative. The famous example comes from Zuzana Budapest. And Madame Budapest, years ago, brought up the subject of a rapist. I believe there was a serial rapist in her community. And she led an effort to bind that person, to stop them from any further rapes, and argued that this was not baneful magic, this was protective magic, and I 100% agree with that. A lot of people will tell you you must never interfere with anyone's free will. And all things being equal, that's perfectly true. But if their free will is to rape you, to murder you, etc., well, you better interfere with that, or you're equally responsible. You have every right to interfere with things like that. And that is not what any sensible person means by saying that you should not interfere with people's free will. Um, so there are times that binding is appropriate. However, it also is a heavy responsibility to take on, and I really don't recommend it um, as a general rule. And you want to be very careful in how you do it. You want to be, if you find yourself, for example, in the situation that Zsuzsanna Budapest was in, where there is a predator ravaging your community and you want to stop them, that's perfectly appropriate. But don't assume you know who it is, unless you absolutely do, because it's entirely possible to misdirect your energy. You want to make sure you're directing your energy to preventing the effect, um, and not assuming parts of it that you may not understand. Now, Krista, hello, Krista. Krista says, I only use baneful magic on predators and abusers. Exactly. Particularly regarding children. It's a heavy energy and you need protection and cleansing. Absolutely. And, those are situations where, again, is it really baneful magic or is it protective magic? I would consider it protective, but it is within the realm of what we're talking about. Just because you disagree with someone, that's not the same kind of thing. Just because you might be having an argument with someone, that's not the same kind of thing. But if someone is actually physically harming someone, someone is committing things like murder, that is a situation where this kind of protective magic might be appropriate. Um, and even then, I think I think you have to be careful. Now, Krista says if the person is innocent, I won't allow the spell to work, meaning that she charges it only to take effect on the guilty party, which is what you should do in such a situation. Um, I will always remember a situation that I encountered about 30 years ago. And there was a man in the Chicago community who was accused by a prominent woman in the community of rape. Not only that, but she told people he had pled guilty to this. And as a result, many of the high priesthood um, began a binding against him in the community, only to find out it was not true. Now, I've always regretted having signed on to this effort on the premise that the other prominent high priesthood would have done at least a little research before they started this. They did not. Um, the situation, although there was an actual situation, it was not the one that was represented. So you have to be very careful about approaching something like that. If you are high priesthood, if you are archpriesthood, taking a protective role in your community is not inappropriate, but it is a heavy responsibility and something that you must do responsibly if you're going to do it. Um, an example of something like this, a little broader, more recent, um, has to do with the Russian-Ukraine war. I knew a lot of people who brought magic to bear into this situation, which I don't necessarily feel was inappropriate. Magic to help the people being invaded. Um, not forgetting that all situations like this are more complex than they may appear. So there are occasions when what might otherwise be thought of as baneful magic is really protective magic. And hello to Ravenwolf in the chat room. It's good to see you, Ravenwolf. Um, but again, if you're going to do that sort of thing, you want to be very mindful of the consequences and of the responsibility involved. And if you feel you're on the receiving end of it, again, That should not be where you make the beginning of your assumptions. And again, I'll compare it to Mercury retrograde. I've seen people who will blame everything going wrong in their life on Mercury retrograde, when the truth is they had made some bad decisions, they had not taken certain actions, um, and there were perfectly ordinary, everyday causes and solutions to the situation. Very often, it's easy to assume that there is baneful magic involved in something, and that is a lazy assumption. Other times, however, it may be what you ultimately come to feel is the case. And again, these are ways to break that magic if it has occurred. And if it did not occur, well, you're not hurting anything by breaking an energetic connection that isn't actually there. Um, Now, today we've been talking about the freezer spell. How do you break a freezer spell? You melt it. But again, there are other ways you can approach this too. You can look for the energetic cord that represents that blockage. You can look for the massive energy within your aura, within your body that represents that blockage, and pull it out that way, or eliminate it that way. There's always more than one way to do something. Um, but anyone who tells you there's nothing you can do is mistaken. Now, Krista says, I also get charged reading about white supremacy judges who let young men off the hook with rape because they come from affluent families with status. Yes, that's very, very upsetting. And we all know about those stories. Um, and that could be a situation where protective magic might be appropriate. But I will say that you have to be careful if all you know about a situation is third hand. Um, but I quite agree. There's a lot of injustice in the world, and using magic to address injustice is not inappropriate. But it does come with responsibility, and it also comes with consequences, which can be good or bad depending on exactly what you've done. Um, and this is why, when Krista was saying earlier, if she were to do a piece of protective magic against a rapist, for example, she would charge it so that it can only affect the actual guilty party. And anything like that should be done in that sense. Now, these are all really very serious subjects. And I cannot too strongly say that you need to approach them seriously, not with paranoia, not with assumptions, but with practicality. So if you feel that you have an energetic blockage that may have originated from someone's action, you want to break that blockage. You also want to remember the blockage might not be the result of an action, but a circumstance. We were talking the other day that even though this is Defense Against the Dark Arts Week, part of what we're talking about also is just random charges that you might encounter in a space or from a person that is not intentional, was not intentionally created, but you still need to do something with it. Um, so always be careful of assumptions. But again, if you're trying to break a binding that has not actually been done, and all you're doing is breaking it, well, if it's not there, you've just wasted some energy. Um, on the other hand, what would be inappropriate to do is to think that because you have had a disagreement with someone, they must have done something, and um, to target energy at that person, not knowing whether any of that is true. That I would strongly advise against. But if you think there's some sort of energetic blockage that's been created against you, breaking that blockage doesn't harm anyone. Um, Now, it's been suggested to me, and I guess I'd like to hear people's thoughts on this, that in addition to talking about the defense against this kind of thing, I perhaps should also talk about some of the ways that it's done so that you understand what you might be dealing with. Today, we've talked about the freezer spell, which again comes out of hoodoo practice and is obviously a relatively modern version of, of a much older technique. I would assume it probably originates as a burial spell, but I don't know that to be true. But the freezer turned out to be a very good adaptation. But obviously, it cannot go back farther than the existence of freezers in its present form. But the idea of binding a person in a bottle through various things, that's nothing new. It's quite ancient, in fact. And there are always ways to break it if you think that you're suffering from that. It is, I think, probably this week is the heaviest group of subjects I've spoken about in this broadcast. And I do want to emphasize the importance of approaching it cautiously. Now, Krista says ego is a huge trap in all of us. Oh, yes, it is. Calming down a bit is best. I like the freezer spell. Um, and as I said earlier, the freezer spell, in one sense, is only to calm down a situation. But it can be used more negatively than that. I don't know that it's ever bad to calm down a situation that could otherwise turn ugly. Um, but um, but there are people out there who will take it farther than that. Um, so if you think that you've been on the receiving end of that, this is how I recommend breaking it. And again, what do you do with the freezer spell? You melt it. Um, you melt it, and you disrupt and dissipate the energy involved in it. So with that, I see we've come to the end of our half hour, and I'm loving the fact that I'm getting so much conversation with people in discussing this subject. I love the interaction. I hope you're loving it too. Tomorrow, we're going to be talking about protective amulets and talismans, and probably to some extent what amulets and talismans are in general. We might talk a little bit about protective automata as well. Um, and that will be less about breaking baneful magic than preventing it from touching you in the first place. And hello to Joanne in the chat room. It's good to see you, Joanne. So with that, we've come to the end of our podcast. So let us close with our prayer as we always do. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for the role you play in our lives, and we rejoice in your presence. We ask you to help us to keep us safe and to keep us positive in our thoughts and actions. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you. And knowing you're always with us, but from respect, we thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. And I thank you for your presence. May you be blessed now and always, and I will see you tomorrow.